Well, good morning. So something you may not know about me is I like to collect church bloopers. I have a reel of my own personal church bloopers. But one of the church bloopers that I love the most are church signs. And so when I see a funny church sign, either in person or on Facebook or whatever, I try to collect it. And so this morning I wanted to show you a collection of church signs, which I think are just funny. And church signs especially, because it's like, man, as the sign guy, you had one job. Right? How can you screw this up? But you see signs like this. Have trouble sleeping? We have sermons. Come hear one. Can I take that personally? Do you know what hell is? Come hear our preacher. Like that one, I think the sign guy stepped back and goes, I get it, but it's too good. I'm not going to change it, right? Come hear our pastor. He's not very good, but he's quick. Now is a good time to visit. Our pastor's on vacation. Little Hope Baptist Church. Some of you may know this church. It's actually in East Texas. It's between Canton and Tyler. And I think there used to be a community there, or maybe there still is a community named Little Hope. But I just have to think, who named a town Little Hope? And when they planted the church there, who thought, this is a great idea, let's name the church Little Hope? Do you go to Great Hope Church? No, I go to Little Hope Church. And one that's applicable for today, don't let worries kill you, let the church help. We're going to launch a new sermon series this morning for 4 weeks called Anxious for Nothing. But I promise you, we don't want to kill you, we want to help you. Last week, Easter Sunday, we gave every family that was in attendance a copy of this book. So it's a book by Max Lucado called Anxious for Nothing. If you were out of town last Sunday, or if you're visiting with us for the first time this Sunday, we want to give you a copy of this book as well, just one per family. And so when you leave here this morning, if you'll stop in the Next Steps area, someone there with a How Can I Help You shirt on will give you one of these books. But for 4 weeks, we're going to use this book as a foundation to teach on and talk about anxiety. And what we mean by that is really worry of any kind, especially excessive worry. Worry that keeps you awake at night, worry that keeps you from functioning normally, even to the degree of panic attacks. Anxiety is at an all-time high, especially in the United States. Did you know the United States is now ranked the most anxious country in all the world? In fact, for women in the United States, anxiety is the number one mental health disorder. And men, you're number 2, only behind alcohol and drug abuse. And so we recognize that anxiety and worry is an issue. And so we're going to be dealing with that issue for the next 4 weeks. And we're going to use 2 verses of Scripture the next 4 weeks to base our teaching off of. And so if you get a Bible this morning, I would encourage you to open it. If you want a Bible in your laps, you can reach down there in the seats and grab one. Or grab your phone and you can pull to a couple of different places on your phone. So as you're doing that, I want to tell you we're going to start in Philippians chapter 4. But I'm going to quickly turn over to Matthew chapter 11. So if you got a Bible open, you can go ahead and mark Matthew 11, find Philippians 4, and we'll turn back to Matthew 11 in a minute. Or if you got your phone, then you can quickly get to Matthew 11 after we're in Philippians 4. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. These 2 verses is what Lucado bases the entire book off of, and we're going to be talking about these verses during each of the Sundays that we're teaching. Philippians 4, 6 through 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Verse 6. By the way, you should just memorize these two verses over the next 4 weeks, okay? Verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything. Do not be anxious about anything. Do not be anxious about anything. Can you believe Paul would even write that? Is it possible to not be anxious about anything? Well, Ryan, I've got kids. I mean, and it's not just the day-to-day thing with the kids. It's in our culture today, how do we even keep them safe? And how do I keep them away from drugs and pornography and sex? And how do I, there's got to be some anxiety with that, right? And eventually they're going to want to leave my house. And how about college? How do we pay for that? And how do I pay for college? Now you're giving me anxiety over just how I pay for my bills each month. And that makes me think about my job. And I'm anxious about it. In fact, you're making me dread. I've already got the Sunday evening blues because I don't want to go back to work tomorrow morning because I'm anxious about my job. And I'm worried. If it makes you feel any better, I have anxiety about my job. Every Sunday morning, I stand up here and go, oh, I hope I don't screw this up. In fact, in the green room, right off to my left here, you're right. We have a quote up on the wall. It's kind of an inside inspiration. But when everyone walks up to the platform, there's a big quote there that says, don't screw this up. And I mean, now I'm in a stage of life where I've got aging parents. And how are they prepared to take care of themselves? If not, how am I going to take care of them? And how am I going to have the financial resources to do that? We could go on and on and on and on. And Paul says, do not be anxious about anything. Is that even possible? There's a premise that Lucado makes in the book. It's on page 8 of the book. That's the premise for the entire teaching series, and it's this. You may want to write this down in your notes section on your handout. It says, the presence of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. Let me say that again. The presence of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. And I can say that with 100% confidence this morning, and here's why. I can go back to Jesus and his teaching. When Jesus began his ministry, he was new into his 3 years of ministry here on this earth. He walked into church on one of those first Sundays, into the synagogue on one of those first Sundays, and the leader of the synagogue handed him a scroll to read. And the reading would have been of the Old Testament prophecy, because they didn't have the New Testament back then, you see? And this was tradition that when a teacher was in attendance at a synagogue meeting, the leader of the synagogue would hand the teacher the scroll of a reading from the Old Testament and have that teacher read it to the entire congregation. So they're in Jesus' hometown of Nazareth, and he goes to the synagogue that day, and the leader of the synagogue hands him a scroll, and he reads from Isaiah chapter 61. You don't have to turn there, but this is in Luke chapter 4. Here's what he stands up and reads that day. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. He rolled up the scroll. He gave it back to the leader of the synagogue. And he said to everyone in attendance, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Now, I want you to notice what he said. To proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty those who are oppressed. Here's what that means to you and I this morning. Jesus did not come and die on a cross and rise from the dead to be a moral compass for us. Jesus did not come and do ministry on this earth to teach us right from wrong. Jesus came to this earth to set us free. And so if you are imprisoned to anxiety, if you are imprisoned to worry, if you are imprisoned to panic attacks, Jesus came to set you free. So yes, the presence of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. If you're living in the prison of anxiety, you're choosing to live there because Jesus came to set you free. Listen, this is important because belief always precedes behavior. If you do not believe or come to a belief that Jesus can set you free from the prison of worry and anxiety or whatever prison you're in, but especially in this message series, if you do not believe that Jesus can set you free from the prison of worry and anxiety, you can be a good listener to 4 weeks of this message series, but it will do nothing to change your life. You have to believe that Jesus can and wants to set you free from worry and anxiety. So this morning, to begin our discussion on that, I want you to go to Matthew chapter 11. And this is Jesus again, and he's teaching, particularly his disciples, but there are probably others that are gathered around. And this is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11. I'm going to read verses 28 through 30. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Now just stay there for just a second. When we carry the burden of worry and anxiety, aren't we looking for some rest? Doesn't it get exhausting to carry the burden of anxiety and worry? I don't mean not just to not sleep at night or to have trouble sleeping, but to just carry the burden, the exhaustion of all the anxiety and worry that we carry around. And I want you to hear what Jesus, if that's you and that resonates with you, listen. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The first thing Jesus says here, if we want to find rest, is that we've got to come to him. He says, "Come to me." If you want rest, if you want to be freed from the prison of anxiety, come to me. Now, we need to talk about that, and we need to talk about that honestly, because where do we usually go when we're stressed? Now, I'm going to meddle just a little bit this morning, okay? Because I know, because I can resonate with most of these. There are some of you in here this morning, those of you watching online, those of you at the Impact Campus, when you are stressed, you turn to eating. You're a stress eater, right? When I get stressed, when I get worried, when I get anxious, put a bowl of chips and hot sauce in front of me and I am okay. Oh, Dr. Pepper too. You gotta have Dr. Pepper. But you do all that, I am good to go, right? Some of us turn to stress eating. And then we worry because, now we've got high cholesterol, we've got high blood pressure, and we've gained too much weight, right? Some of us in this room, we do what's called retail therapy. Right? Yes? When mama gets stressed, mama buys a new pair of shoes, right? When mama gets stressed, and mama buys a new outfit to go with those shoes, right? Or is it the other way around? And you men, listen, when daddy gets stressed, daddy buys a new boat, right? We buy big. We do a little retail therapy to make us feel better. And does it make us feel better? Yes, for just a brief amount of time. And then we're stressed because how are we going to make the payment on the credit card? We have worry and anxiety about that. Some of us, when we're stressed, we turn to binge watching. Our favorite shows, our favorite series, whatever it is. I got to admit to you, this is where I go the most. When I get stressed, worried, anxious, I just want to sit by myself and watch whatever I want to watch. And watch it for as long as I want to watch. This afternoon, after preaching 3 services here this morning, I've got to bust out to Abernathy for a meeting at our campus out there, and then I will be back home, and you will find me on my couch watching the Masters. And I don't want anyone else around. I want it to be very quiet, because with the golf clap, I can take a nap, and it is so easy to do. And it takes me to a place where for a while, I get some very temporary relief. Some of you turn to Fortnite. Some of you turn to Xbox or to PS4. So we can turn to all kinds. Some of you turn to social media. As if you weren't already worried enough, you see everyone else's glamorous life on Facebook, and then you have even more reason to be worried, right? There's all these things that we turn to. Jesus said, "Come to me." Stop turning to all of those things and come to me. Don't go to a conference. Don't go to a program. Don't go to 21 steps to relieve your anxiety. This week I did a Google search. And in the search bar, I just typed in stopping anxiety in your life. On the first page, I'll just read you some of the articles that came up. 22 quick tips to change your anxiety forever. 7 ways to calm your worried mind and reduce anxiety. 10 ways to stop anxiety quickly. How to stop worrying. Self-help tips for anxiety relief. 15 easy ways to beat anxiety now. I got anxious just reading the list. Jesus says, "Come to me." This week, last week actually, we had a computer at our house that needed some repair. The screen got broke and there were some other things wrong with it. And so I took it to a computer repair shop. Across the street from the computer repair shop was an oil change place. I didn't take my computer to the oil change place because the oil change place changes oil. It doesn't repair computers. But how often do we take a weary, restless soul to an oil change place? God created our soul. Jesus knows us better than anyone else, which is why he says, "Come to me." TV can't fix you. Fortnite can't fix you. Social media can't fix you. I can heal you. Come to me. Listen, here's what we need to be doing this week. We need to be doing a Google search that says, what does the Bible say about worry? What does the Bible say about anxiety? The first step to getting rid of anxiety is coming to Jesus. What does God have to say to us? What does God want to say to us? Just spending time with him every day and not just talking at him, but listening to him. What does he want to say to us? The bottom line is this. Most of us in this room, if we're problematic with worry and anxiety, need to have a come to Jesus meeting with our worry and our anxiety. Come to Jesus. And then here's what he says. Take my yoke upon you. I knew this was too good to be true. There's a catch. Now, as if I didn't have enough stress already, there's something else I've got to add to my load. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. But wait, he says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Sometimes we don't get this because we don't deal in yolks anymore unless we're talking about an egg yolk. The thing that Jesus did that he was so good at teaching is that he took something that was so prominent in the culture that everyone that was listening would just grab onto and know exactly what he was talking about. And so when he said yoke, everyone listening knew exactly what he was meaning. He was talking about this harness that would go over 2 oxen or 2 cattle that would be used to pull the plow or whatever it is that they would be using to pull. And he said, listen, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And what he was telling the listeners is, if you will take my yoke upon you, it will lighten your load. It didn't mean that one oxen had to do it all by themselves, but now there was two sharing the load. And Jesus is saying, if you'll take my yoke upon you, I will make it easier for you. I will lighten your load. But there's something else here he's saying. He's saying you need to understand that when you take a yoke upon you, you no longer have control of where you go. When an oxen puts a yoke on its back, it is under the control of the one who's in charge of the yoke. Jesus is saying, take my yoke upon you. Here's what he's saying. He's saying, you've done it long enough in your own power and in your own way. And how's that working for you? Because it's left you with a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress, a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety, panic attacks. And you need to give that up and just let me take over. It's like when you're the passenger in a car. Several years ago, the church went on some of the church staff went to a church conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Church on the Move is a big church there, and there was 5 of us that went to this conference. I was one of those 5, and when we got to the airport, we got the rental car, a Chrysler Town and Country minivan. And I was a designated driver because my name was on the rental agreement. And so Lorraine Klafka, our kids pastor, she had only been at Aldersgate a few months at that time. She didn't know me that well. She had definitely never ridden in a vehicle with me. And when we got into the rental car to go from the airport to the hotel, when we got out at the hotel, she let me know very clearly that I was a terrible driver. Now, in my defense, 2 things. Number 1, we were in a rental. You know how you drive rentals, right? You drive them like you stole them, right? I mean, you just let go, you let loose. And secondly, in my defense, I was in a town I'd never driven in before. You know what it's like to be in a town you've never driven in before? All of a sudden, boom, there's your exit. You have to go across 4 lanes of traffic to get off, right? And so that just worked that way. The rest of that trip, I thought she was going to call a taxi a couple of times because she did not want to ride with me. This was 4 years ago. 4 years. Just this week, the staff were doing something. We had to all carpool in two cars to get to where we were going. Lorraine volunteered to ride with me for 2 reasons. Number 1, she's discovered in these 4 years that some of the staff drive worse than I do. And number 2, she's learned to trust me. I haven't killed her yet. She's grown to trust me. This is what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, trust me. He's saying, see, you struggle. You have worry and you have anxiety because you won't trust me. The root issue of your worry and anxiety is control. Just let go. You see, you're wanting to take my yoke upon you, but you want to drive still. You can't trust me and drive at the same time. You've got to move over to the passenger seat. That's what Jesus is saying. Imagine today the places where you're worried and anxious, if you would let go and trust God. Boy, that's easier to say than to do, isn't it? Jesus said, come to me. Trust me. Take my yoke upon you. And then here's what he says. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. Let's think about those 2 things for a minute. Gentle and lowly in heart. Jesus says, learn from those 2 things. I am gentle and lowly in heart. Well, let's talk about gentleness. What's the opposite of gentle? Aggressive? Well, let's take lowly in heart. It could be translated humble. What's the opposite of humble? Prideful? See, Jesus is saying, you worry because you're so aggressive about everything. You just need to be gentle. You just need to be patient. You just need to wait. Learn from me on these things. And then he says, you're arrogant. Learn from me and be lowly in heart. Don't be so prideful. Don't be so arrogant. Just be humble. As I leave you this morning before we pick up here next week, I would say this to us. One of the biggest steps of being freed from the prison of anxiety and worry is being able to admit we're in a prison of anxiety and worry. Oftentimes, we're just too prideful to admit that. This week, we had staff meeting on Tuesday morning like we always do, and I went around the room with all the staff gathered in the room, and I said, all right, share two things. Number one, where do you have anxiety in your personal life? And number two, where do you have anxiety in your ministry? And so I did the same. This is where I'm having some anxiety in my personal life. This is where I have anxiety in my ministry. I didn't share this, and as I've continued to meditate on these words this week, I want to share this with you because I want you to resonate with the prison that we all find ourselves in. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 28, Paul is talking to a group and he shares this sentence. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Man, I get that. And I'm sharing that with you this morning because it's a way for me to be humble, to be lowly in heart. And I'm asking you to do the same. Would you just close your eyes for a second? No one needs to be looking around. No one needs to be seeing anybody else in the room. But if you would be humble or lowly in heart this morning, if you would die to your pride and your arrogance and admit that you have excessive worry and anxiety in your life, would you just slip your hand up in the air? Wow. Thank you. You can put your hand back down. If you raised your hand, I want you to know you're not alone. Not by a long shot. We're the most anxious nation in the world. But this morning, you can take that first step by admitting that you find yourself in a prison of anxiety. And if you're willing to admit it, then here's what Jesus would say. Come to me. Just come to me. Have a come to Jesus meeting with me this morning. Have a come to Jesus moment with me today. And take my yoke upon you. Just trust me. I know it's hard to do. This is Jesus speaking to you. I know it's hard to do. But lay it down and just trust me. The band's gonna play a song this morning, as we always do here at Aldersgate. The prayer corner will be open as it always is. If you need someone to pray with you or over you about worry or anxiety or anything else for that matter. The altar's open as it always is here at Aldersgate. If you want to come and just be lowly in heart and kneel down and say, this is my prison, but I believe you came to set me free, and I want to be free, so help me trust you. Whatever God leads you to do this morning, you do, so you can walk out of here with a lighter load.